This morning, I'd like to give you a few reflections of growing up in downtown Detroit. I grew up about 1.5 miles from here in an area called Black Bottom. The Black Bottom area was so named because it had black, rich dirt, not because African Americans lived there. We had many ethnic groups in the neighborhood. We had Italians, we had Jewish people, we had Syrian people, we had Albanian people, etc., and including Greektown. People from Greektown lived in our area. The Black Bottom area roughly ran from the riverfront to Warren and from John R. over to about Elmwood Cemetery. We were all in that neighborhood because that was where we had to live because of restrictive covenants that was in the house deeds. We lived in that area and we had a lot of icons. One of the icons we had was Joe Louis, the great heavyweight champion of the world. His mother lived down the street from us. We used to go by her house and she would always come out and encourage us. We also had Joe that would come into the neighborhood and give us encouragement. He gave us encouragement all the time. We had others there also. We had people that came to our neighborhood, such as Dr. Charles Drew. And Dr. Charles Drew then was the person that invented the storing of blood plasma. He did that in the 1930s and the early 1940s. He formed the first blood bank to store blood to save lives during World War II. And Dr. Charles Drew was always in the neighborhood. He would come to the local churches and talk to people, even though he did not live in Detroit. He was a great icon in our community. After World War II, we had another young man that became a great icon in our community. He was called Thurgood Marshall, the great Supreme Court Justice. Thurgood Marshall fought the case that removed restricted covenants out of the housing deeds and allowed people to live wherever they wanted to. That was in 1948. So in 1948, that started some of the civil rights movements that we all were very, very, very familiar with that lasted later on. In fact, there were several fights that were fought regarding that around the Detroit area. Within about 1 mile from here, we have some other things that we all need to see called Second Baptist Church. And that was one of the stops on the Underground Railroad. And it was there in the 1860s that helped people go to Canada and become free. So again, Detroit was one of the leading proponents in the Civil Rights March. We fought a lot of battles here. In fact, in 1963, a young man named Martin Luther King came to Detroit. There was a great march that was organized regarding his I Have a Dream speech. That march was organized with Reverend Franklin, who was the father of Aretha Franklin. He organized that march and we all walked together down Woodward Avenue. I was in that march. There were 125,000 people that demonstrated that day. They said at the time, according to the Free Press and other newspapers, the largest civil rights movement in the United States. That was before he gave his I Have a Dream speech in Washington, D.C. So you see, we centered on a lot of things that made African American history here in Detroit very important to all of us. Some of the things we talk about here, you may not know, it might be news to you. But again, we were here, we actually did it. The neighborhood that was called Black Bottom actually was torn down somewhere about 1960. And they literally bulldozed it down and hauled it away. The buildings are gone. There's nothing there. The streets are not even in the same place anymore. Even though they might have the same name, they're in different places throughout the city. So again, many of us then moved away because our neighborhood was gone. In the 1970s, the people from Black Bottom, as it's referred to, they elected the first African American mayor of Detroit. Those people moved all over the city, and they had campaigns, and they elected Coleman Young. So Detroit then is on the forefront of the civil rights movement, and many things have happened. Brown versus the Board of Education had some roots tied to Detroit too, and that was another case that the great Thurgood Marshall fought and won. So we have great ties to all of this stuff that's tied to the Black Bottom area and Detroit. Another great fighter that came out of our neighborhood was Ray Robinson. He practiced at the Brewster Center, which was on Hastings and Brewster, and that was before the Cronk's Gym. That was the place to go to learn how to fight. So we had two great fighters that served us here in Detroit. And again, people from that community, and I think we have some here, people from that community are very proud people, and we want to make sure that we continue to carry the dream. One of the things I did that led me to this, where I am now, I was a principal at a high school in Pontiac, Michigan, very closely tied to the same kinds of things that we were talking about this morning. I used to participate in an activity called Keepers of the Dream. And this morning, I wanted to bring that to your attention, that Keepers of the Dream is something that we need to participate in here at Fort Street. We want to keep alive the struggles of Black history and the things that we've done throughout time to get to be diverse as we are today. So Keepers of the Dream, again, is another program that is done by Oakland University, and it's a very important program. They bring in speakers from all over the United States and the country to talk about that. So I wanted to make sure that we all understood that Detroit is really on the forefront, and we have a rich history and diversity. We had no segregated schools. We went to public schools with all of our neighbors, which included the Jewish people, the Italians, Syrians, et cetera, people that lived in the neighborhood. And I went to school, a school called Duffield Elementary. And it's right over here on the east side, about 2 miles from here. And it still stands. It's still a school there. It was built in the 1920s. And it's a beautiful school. You have to go by there and look at it sometimes. It's 3 stories high with elevators. So it's another one of our proud heritage points. I also went to Cass Technical High School, which it's not there anymore now. It's deserted. They're getting ready to tear it down. But the old Cass at the corner of 2nd and Verna. And they had another building that was connected to that building called Cass Commerce. It was a high school of commerce, they call it now, but at that time it was called Cass Commerce. And it was connected by a bridge. So we had diversity back in those days, in the 1930s and 40s. So again, I wanted to call your attention to those things and make sure that we all understand that we are a diverse population and we're still here fighting the dream.